Ricardo, I wonder if you agree with that, because I imagine that China has learned a lesson here, hasn't it? That it can't really depend on just exports to the U.S. Not that it did completely anyways, but I imagine it is looking for greener pastures.
Yes, I like that you mentioned lesson. I was just thinking about this whole trade war as you can think about a relationship in a couple. So when you think about a relationship that is going through a very rough patch, there's always going to be some one of them trying to amend, trying to put the other person in the corner, try to give the talk. So I see China and the U.S. as in a relationship right now, and you know how they say that you shouldn't go to sleep angry at your partner.
Yeah.
This is exactly what is going on now, because the U.S. wants to put China a little bit on the spot and say, okay, we're going to leave the scene. We're not going to slap the tariffs on until you agree on the MOUs that we want to sign to get away from this trade war. In fact, there are very positive signs. I think, although all of this could still fail at the mercy of a tweet, and we all know what we're talking about, the general semantics and the sentiment is changing. We're talking more about the trade deal instead of a trade war. I hear words and read words that are more pragmatism or closer talks. And there's more encouragement, definitely. So Trump is a transaction-based man. He comes from the real estate industry. He's not a great visionary. So he thinks at least he knows what he's doing. He's treating the other party like a contractual party. And he's moving ahead. Also, because there's pressing issues back at home. Yeah.
Okay, so let me bring in Andy to react to that, Ricardo, because Andy, I wonder, in all of this, do you think it is just the U.S., as we've spoken about in the previous segment, Andy, not accepting that we're really part of a multipolar world now? That one-time unipolar world which may have existed in Trump's mind or in the U.S. establishment's mind, that's long gone.
Yes, I think that from a geopolitical perspective, you're exactly right that, we had this, perhaps honeymoon, this interregnum since at least post-World War II, where it was a unipolar world. The United States was the last man standing. And as a result of that, got to rebuild the world in its image. And I think now we see challengers like China, like India, perhaps even like the EU. We can see kind of sort of to have their own thoughts and wanting to go their own way, at least on certain issues. But I think one thing I want to go back to what one of the other panelists mentioned, and this point about it's not just China diversifying in terms of export markets, which I think, of course, is happening as a result of this. But we have to look at an important constituency of Trump's political base, or actually farmers, and soybean farmers in particular. So I think part of what's driving this, this man-made crisis on the U.S. side is, I think, the political recognition that key political constituencies in the United States, not just the corporations, but the farmers, are being hurt. And what's unfortunate is that this has backfired, I think, for the Trump administration, and that food security is an importantly enormous issue for China. And I think what this has shown is the U.S. is perhaps not such a reliable partner from a food import perspective as well, not just as an export market.
I wonder, Jamie, do you think that Trump's gamble here has backfired? Because I imagine Trump can argue, listen, we're getting concessions from China. That's a win.
Well, Trump has a known strategy of coming in and making outrageous demands, and then in the end making concessions and asking for something reasonable. And many have argued that he could have just asked from that for the beginning. So if you ask for all this ridiculous stuff and then you ask for a small concession, then people are like, oh, it's quite reasonable. But there's all this fallout and this ruffling of feathers, which he seems to enjoy. But politically, it's not beneficial. If you promise your voter base all this jobs and this kind of thing, and then you mess with the livelihood of Americans and their jobs, then that's going to have consequences when it comes time to vote, with his reputation and whatnot. And the other thing is that the U.S. is becoming known as an unreliable player. And it's not just with China, it's with Japan, it's with the UK, it's with the EU. And if the US can't be trusted, then what does their way of life that they're trying to export, the American way, what does it say about this? And then what openings does it leave for China exporting their culture and their way, or the UK or the EU? And it's just gonna have a knock-on effect on American influence in a huge way.
Riccardo, do you agree with that? Because, a lot of the accusations against China on the part of the United States, we can talk about, for example, currency manipulation, right? And Steven Mnuchin has apparently for the past 2 years tried to find manipulation on the part of China of the yuan, and has been unable to find that because he really wants to declare China a currency manipulator. And now, I wonder if that sort of just is egg in the face of the U.S., not just on the currency manipulation issue, but just in general, really, about how all of this has been handled.
Well, as previously said, all of these issues could have been raised in a different way, more in bits, but it all came up 229 days ago now. Since the trade war started. I think that there's many things at stake. It's agriculture, it's currency manipulation. It's all written in the tentative rundown of the memorandums of understanding. But definitely, the way it has been handled is very new to the, can we say, contemporary economy and politics? Because never before has, and I'm keeping the U.S. as the focus here in geopolitics. Never before has the U.S. power been so much questioned. Ever since I think Trump took his post, there has been questions. He has been putting everything under the spotlight. Look the way he treated NATO. Look the way he wanted to dismiss a lot of ongoing agreements that could be beneficial or cumulatively beneficial for many countries. But this roughing the feathers, as rightly pointed out, is being disliked by many, but it also unveiled the issue that the U.S. will not always be the predominant political, military, economical power, or let's say not anymore. These are the two biggest players on the field. And as I heard it was said very smartly and wisely just a few minutes ago, this is an urgent issue to solve. Although it's 1 week away, we're seeing all good signs. I personally see good outcomes from this, but it's very urgent because if there's a failure, there's worldwide implications.
Indeed, and I wanted to pick up on those world occasions, if you allow me, Riccardo. Andy, the World Bank says if this trade war continues, it's seeing a possible global recession by 2020. And there are a lot of statistics that the World Bank has spoken about how both the American and Chinese economies will be negatively, of course, affected going forward if this continues. But beyond that, as Riccardo there said, the entire world is already suffering, really. A lot of the markets around the world are suffering. A lot of people are suffering, ever so slowly businesses are. Do you think that both sides can be responsible in this case and calmly negotiate this?
Well, I think it's just the nature of the world or geopolitics that every country looks after its own interests first. So I think whether or not, the impact on third countries is a secondary consideration. It would be my view on this. That being said, clearly, as responsible world powers, it does factor into their calculations. But I think that the World Bank, in having a less optimistic outlook, in fact, I think their latest report was called Darkening Skies, as a way to signal their concern about global growth. That trade is an important part of it. And I think the effect is really less direct in that the impact it has on investor confidence and consumer confidence more than any direct impact. But more importantly, I think, is what is happening globally from a liquidity perspective. And I think there is cause for optimism in that the Fed has said now that they're going to end this quantitative tightening. So sometime this year, and that interest rate rises are on pause. And I think that probably is a bigger threat to global prosperity than the trade conflict between the United States and China.
Jamie, I'm going to give you the final word because we just have a minute left. I'm wondering, Jamie, Obama had spoken about pivot to Asia. Is this all part of that? Do you think that even if there is a trade deal, this is not the end of tensions between China and the U.S.?
I don't really see a decline in the tensions. If you look at China's Belt and Road Initiative, there's two maritime routes. One is through the Arctic, and the other one is through the South China Sea into the Indian Ocean, and then towards Africa into the Middle East. And that is a significant global trade corridor. It's a major energy corridor.
Indeed.
And this is not going to become a non-core issue for many countries. It's hugely important for Pakistan, for India, for America, for everybody in the South China Sea. And I don't think that the importance of this trade corridor can be underestimated. And as China challenged UNCLOS, the construction of a man-made island, the expansion of their naval power, and then the U.S., especially under Trump, wanting to pull out of these things, the saying that he doesn't want to fund maritime security and anti-piracy, and he doesn't want to fund this global security, there's going to be a definite rebalancing of power and all these competing interests we have with China, with South Korea, with Japan, and it's a very complicated issue.
Indeed, it is a very complicated issue. Of course, spoken about just a few of the factors surrounding this, but we, of course, appreciate all of our guests' time, insight, and, of course, analysis that they brought to this discussion. That was Mr. Jamie Mulholland, geopolitical analyst and China specialist. He's contributed to the University of Nottingham's Asia Research Institute and been speaking to us from London. We were also joined by Mr. Riccardo Benussi, foreign direct investment advisor, regional manager at Dezan Shira Associates, speaking to us from Shanghai on the line. We were also joined by Mr. Andy Mock, non-resident fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, who is speaking to us from Beijing. And earlier in the program, we were joined by Mr. Finbar Birmingham, editor at the South China Morning Post's political economy team, and he had been speaking to us from Hong Kong. And now, viewers, as all of our guests spoke about, there is the economic factor, of course, to all of this, but then one wonders why the U.S. would, in this fashion at least, approach China with any legitimate, if it is so, complaints about its trade practices. This could have been handled in a different fashion, as all of our guests essentially agreed. One has to wonder then if this is more to do with geopolitics than actual economy and worries about American businesses, etc. We'll keep a very close eye on how those talks develop, those 6 MOUs that are rumored to be signed soon. We'll keep a close eye on here in the scope as well. Stay tuned, though. I'll be back with our next segment after this short break.